Welcome to At Home with Cheryl Gillespie and Sam Shakura, the hottest and latest in design, fashion, art, and lifestyle. Get the inside track as they talk to the experts and reveal designer secrets to fabulous living.
Welcome to At Home. Come on in. I hope that everybody had a fabulous week. Did you have a great Valentine's Day? Oh, I hope you were just brilliantly filled with love, and you got chocolates and all sorts of goodies and had a really special, I hope it happened all week long, that you just had an amazing week. Anyways, we're going to continue on with the heart theme, and we love our hearts. This month we're going to talk with Dr. Brenda Watson about heart health. It is the #1 killer of women in Canada, and that's scary. We need all the information that we can get. But before we talk about our heart, we're going to talk about air quality. Nothing is more important than the air that we breathe. It needs to be clean. It needs to be pure. It needs to, keep us healthy. It's a really important component of our home. And it's a scary fact that the air in our homes can be more polluted than the air outside. Yes. You think this is your safe haven. You should be able to breathe deeply, breathe purely in this space, but not always the case. So we need to find out some information about how we can keep the air quality in our homes the best it can possibly be. So we've invited Robert Bean to help us out. He's a registered engineer technologist. He's an expert on energy and indoor environmental air quality. Let's get right to it and welcome Robert. Robert, great to have you here at home.
Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Well, we love to chat with, folks who are leaders in our industry, and I don't know, it's real important to have a nice warm home, and then in the summer, of course, a nice cool home. These are important elements. Everybody thinks we always worry about the aesthetics and the decorating side of things, but we actually worry about the comfort level too.
And the efficiency.
Hey, there's more money for shoes if our heating and cooling bills are lower.
Shoes and holidays.
Absolutely. Well, you don't need to take a holiday if you love your home.
Or your shoes. You can just stay at home with your shoes.
Absolutely. You can put on the flip-flops and pretend you're in Mexico. You can put on the hand-embroidered boots and pretend you're in Istanbul.
Absolutely. But you're right. I mean, thermal comfort is a really important aspect of the indoor environment. And I mean, indoor environment it's a big topic. Of course, thermal comfort is just one element. But, as you ladies know, you can have, a beautiful home and a beautiful, surroundings, like visually stimulating, but it can still be cold, it can still be drafty and still be dry or muggy. And if these elements are present, then the people have sort of a sense of dissatisfaction, even though the surroundings are really nice. So thermal comfort is really important as an element of indoor environmental quality.
Well, in this spring, so many folks are engaging in renovations, or maybe they're even pouring a foundation for a new home. So let's chat about some of the things that we can do, some of the new technologies to create these fabulous,
I think before we do that, I think everyone at home is going to go, I don't even know if it's good or not. I think is there a quick evaluation of what we have and if it is working for us or not, Robert?
We do this really cool thing with clients. And it sounds bizarre, but it really works. And that is if they're planning far enough in advance and building a new home, we actually get them over the year, if they have a year of planning, available. Just every once in a while, sit down in various spaces of the home and physically close your eyes and then really get in tune with your other senses. So we get them to think about or to hear sounds that maybe they don't want in their new house, or we get them to experience temperatures like drafts or maybe too much solar heat on their bodies from windows that they wouldn't want in their new house. And that exercise, if you do that in your bedrooms and your living rooms and your family rooms, basically your socializing areas, it's amazing after a year of sort of the inventory of things that you don't actually want to have in your new house. And I'll give you an example of that. Say you have a living room and you do a lot of entertaining. If you have a bathroom, for example, next to the living room, when people go to use the facilities, some people find that sound to be rather disturbing if you're in conversations with people in the living room. So simply by moving or locating bathrooms away from socializing areas, eliminates that sound that some people find rather unappealing. Same thing with temperatures. If you have a beautiful space that you want to occupy, again for social purposes, you inviting friends over, if it becomes uninhabitable because there's so much solar gain into the space because of windows, then you want to pay attention to these things. And so over a year of sort of recording these elements that you don't want in your new house, you can sit down with the builder and say, these are the things that we don't want, and these are the things that we do want as it relates to the indoor environment. So it's a really powerful exercise and very useful if you've got the time to plan for that.
Great points. And those are things that your designer, your architect, and your builder should all be part of the conversation. And they should also be bringing, they should be looking as professionals for those negatives.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. Like when you look at indoor environmental quality, oftentimes people, well, I say not oftentimes, but most people, rather than express satisfaction with an indoor environment, they'll express dissatisfaction. And it's simply because when we are satisfied, we don't think about it. Our body doesn't have to respond by shivering or sweating, or we don't have to adapt to the environment by closing blinds or opening up registers or doing these types of things. So we tend not to say it's really great in this environment, as opposed to we say a lot of times, well, it's cold or too bright or too loud or something like that. So we typically express dissatisfaction as opposed to satisfaction.
The other thing that I think happens, Robert, is that folks don't know the environment, or they're moving to a new environment. Say, for example, you're buying a second home. So, you might be from Alberta and you're buying a summer home in British Columbia, or you're buying a home in Phoenix or Scottsdale, or, somewhere in the States where the weather is substantially different than it is where you normally live. There's things and considerations that you probably don't know because you've never lived there.
Right, and it's important from a couple of aspects. One has to do with acclimating or being climatized to that environment, and the other thing, so that's from sort of the personal point of view, but then there's also from an architectural point of view. And if you look at it from an architectural point of view, we see that with maybe you have a certain idea of a house plan that you like architecturally and from one climate, and you bring that house plan to another climate. Sometimes that doesn't work. And so, architecturally, as you move from one city to another, your buildings should also change to reflect sort of the natural element around that space, but also from an occupant point of view, going from a cold climate to a warm climate, or vice versa, warm climate to a cold climate. Humans do acclimate. It just takes takes a while. Like if someone from the North Pole comes to Phoenix, it's a bit of a shock. Likewise, somebody from Africa that comes to Canada would find it a bit of a shock, but they do acclimate over a period of time.
And we just hope that our homes can serve us well there. What about, how important is the indoor air quality to our health?
It's a great area of study right now, and one of the big areas that the health industry is concerned about is particulate matter. And rather than getting into the science of particles, let's just talk about really small stuff that actually we inhale, and it ends up into the deep part of our lungs. And these, of course, can actually end up in our bloodstream and then contaminate our bodies or have the body react to these contaminants. So indoor air quality is really important, and particularly as, there's a real strong trend to build homes tighter. And as a result of that, what's on the inside stays in the inside. And so really important that, particularly in your profession, to pick finishes and materials of construction or fabrics and paints and these types of things that have low VOCs as far as chemicals go, but also have a low output of particulate matter. So things that would break down, typically would be anything that's made out of a fabric type of stuff. Those over a period of time, if they're exposed to solar light, what we call shortwave radiation, particularly if it's the plastics, not so much the natural fabrics. Natural fabrics have a tendency to sort of retain their integrity over a period of time, but the more plastic materials, they will break down. And of course, as they break down, they turn into particulate matter, and that can, if it's small enough, it can get airborne, and we can end up breathing it into our bodies. So very important stuff. And another one that's very critical is moisture. And that, again, if you have moisture problems inside the house, pathogens like viruses and bacteria, they love moisture. And as we know, these can lead to things like molds, what we call our allergens. So molds, viruses, bacteria, they're also things that we are concerned about as indoor environmental quality specialists, if you will.
There's a happy balance there, though, isn't there? Because we want a certain amount of moisture because it's better for our health, but yet we don't want an abundance of moisture because it's not good for our health.
Yeah, it's a great point. And in Canada, of course, we have some challenges because, depending on where you are in Canada, you can have, like where you folks are from, you have very mild winters. But if you get into northern Canada, then of course they have very severe winters. And so moisture is a bit of a challenge in the fact that if you get into really cold climates and if you have higher moisture, you can get condensation problems. And people, consumers see that when you have moisture build up on your windowsills, for example. So controlling moisture is really important from the health point of view, but also from the building point of view, but also with materials like woods. Woods are what we call a hygroscopic material, which means their dimensional stability is a function of the moisture content. And, as any old carpenter from the old country will know that, you have to allow for expansion and contraction in woods, and those dimensional changes is very much a factor of the moisture content. So we talk about the moisture having an influence on the health of the environment, which has an influence on the health of the occupants by connection, but also material stability, and then also to control, things like the allergens and the pathogens that moisture can support. So very important topic.
All right, we'll take a short break, and then when we come back, let's chat about some of the new innovations and what's hot in heating and cooling systems.
Very good.
Welcome back to At Home. Here are your hosts, Cheryl Gillespie and Sam Shakura.
Welcome back to At Home. We are chatting with Robert Bean. Robert, okay, let's make this simple because I think it can be really daunting on folks, whether they're renovating or whether they're building a new home or, just doing some upgrades and keeping it simple. They get into the heating and cooling, and then all of a sudden it's like you read so much online, it's where do you go? What do you do? It can get complicated and very confusing.
It sure can. And I mean, kudos to people that go out and do some of the research work on, all the new stuff that's out there and in their indoor environments. But one of the dangers of having that information is that you can now be held responsible for making decisions based on stuff that maybe you really don't know anything about. You might know the words and you might know what the products look like. And so we're more in favor of teaching consumers how to define their expectations with the builder and the contractors, and then let them worry about the details. And that's really easy to do for consumers to do. You can again, we talked about some of the exercises of writing down what you don't want and what you do want, but you can also, write down or record, what your expected, budget might be for energy consumption. And based on your own knowledge of what your own cash flow is, based on your job and all the other things that people have to finance in their life, right? Food and education and these types of things. But sit down with the contractor after you've made your list and then just say, this is what I can afford. This is what we want from this amount of money. And then leave it in the hands of the professionals. And, one of the nice things about living in Canada is that we do actually have a number of associations, professional associations, that do certify contractors in terms of being able to do proper designs and proper installations. And when this process of, the designer, the professional doing the right work, the right design, the right installation, and having code officials inspect it according to the requirements of the code, it works. And I think that's a really good approach for consumers. Is just do your homework if you like, but get really clear at what you expect from the builder and the contractor, and then leave it up to them, and then let the system do its job.
You know, that is so true. And we come across that all the time, and we love it when our clients take the time to educate themselves so they ask the right questions. But even us who are in the business that do this day in and day out, we still defer to the folks who work in a specific industry like yourself, or the heating and cooling experts that we're going to buy the products off. And that doesn't mean we're not going to get a second and a third opinion or a second and third quote like like we should be doing as our due diligence. But we rely on their expertise. These are the folks that deal with this day in and day out. 7 days a week, they're dealing with these specific, items within the home. So who should know better than the folks that spend their full-time careers working in this specific industry or about this specific item?
Yeah, it's so true. And further on that, it's really important for consumers to really take ownership of their money. And what I mean by that is that when you build a house, or you enter a contract with a builder, those are your dollars that you're spending, and you want to make sure that those dollars go towards the right things in that house, because it's not like you can rebuild that house if you're not happy with it. And so one of the ways to make sure that you get the right people is don't be afraid to ask for certifications, and don't be afraid to ask for recommendations, and it's okay to get on the internet and search for codes and standards for heating and ventilation systems for your particular area. For example, in British Columbia, there are certain requirements in that in Vancouver, for example, and there's certain requirements in Alberta, and there's certain requirements in Ontario. So wherever you are from in Canada, it's okay to get on the internet and find out what the requirements are, so that when you go sit down with the builder, you can say, we want certified people on our project, and so have that strength, because a lot of people they're scared. They know it's a big investment. They fear it because it's a big project. They don't want to make the wrong decisions. And part of that making the wrong decisions, it causes that fear, and they may hesitate to be demanding. And I just think that consumers need to sort of say, look, these are our hard-earned dollars, and this is what we want, and be firm in that.
Well, and there's a real science to building a home, and if the builder or the contractor is recommending this specific HVAC system or this heating system, you can go online, you can phone up some consumer advocates and check the reviews on the product.
Absolutely.
Because you're right,
Absolutely.
it's a lot of money. All right, speaking of heating and cooling systems, what are some of the new technologies out there? What are some of the things you're most excited about, Robert?
I would say the number one thing that I'm excited about is that the industry is starting to realize the benefits of separating ventilation systems from the thermal comfort systems. And what do I mean by that? Right now, sort of the standard HVAC system, sort of the go-to builder version, if you will, is a single furnace, and that single furnace is responsible for heating the space, and they would then tie in fresh air into the furnace to bring fresh air in. Of course, in order for fresh air to come in, bad air has to go out, and that's sort of the go-to, and that meets codes in most parts of the country. They may have a requirement in some parts of the country to have an air-to-air heat exchanger. We can come back and talk about that later if you want. But what we're finding is that dedicated ventilation systems allow heating systems to do a much better job on their own, as opposed to mixing them together. So for me, the number one excitement or at least the thing that I sense as excitement, is that people are realizing that there's really good benefits to having a separate ventilation system and a separate heating system. And just one of those benefits is that you don't need to have your heating system to run in order to have ventilation in the building. That ventilation system can run continuously, always bringing in fresh air, always getting out of the bad air. And then if you need to have a heating system kick in, then you can do that. And so that's for me probably one of the big exciting areas that we're starting to see happen. And then what fits really nice into that, of course, is when you look at maybe things like radiant floor heating systems, which run not off a furnace, but off of some kind of like a boiler or a water heater of sorts. And these systems, of course, they are standalone heating. They don't have an air element to it, which means in order to satisfy the requirements of the building codes for ventilation, you have to have a separate ventilation. So quite often we're seeing more and more radiant floor heating with air-to-air heat exchangers, and that's a beautiful combination. What's interesting about it, ladies, is that system, when I got out of school in 1983, that was our go-to system. So although people are seeing more and more of it, it's something that's actually been around for a long time.
Well, there's nothing nicer than radiant heat. If you have tile or, concrete floors, which are becoming more and more popular. I mean, the radiant heat is the nicest heat, and I believe it's the healthiest heat because it doesn't blow all that hot air around.
One of the beautiful things about radiant is it's an enabler. And what I mean by being an enabler is it enables consumers to embrace these, the concrete floors and the tile floors and these, what I would call sort of a masonry style floor. And what's nice about those floors is they have very low to no, I don't say no VOCs because there's some element, but they have a really, really low VOC component. So they're much, in terms of healthy environments, these masonry surfaces are easy to clean. They maintain their integrity. They don't break down due to solar light or shortwave radiation, we call it. And but consumers tend to, when you think about masonry surfaces, they tend to think, oh, they're cold, and well, we have a solution for that, right? Let's heat it up. And so we can heat up these masonry surfaces so you get the thermal comfort benefit, plus you have a low VOC, easy cleanable surface, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful combination.
We live with it at home, and I mean, it's the ease of maintenance. We were on the floor all the time with the dogs.
Yeah, even it just feels good. We're talking about loving our home, and nothing feels better than getting out of bed and putting your feet on warm tile.
Or out
Isn't
of the
that great?
And you know what we do now too a lot is we run the radiant heat right in the shower, and now you don't even have to have those glass walls up.
Isn't that nice?
Oh my goodness! Aesthetically, it's brilliant.
That for us. Like, we have a client right now that has a couple of outdoor or outside walls, and both of them have showers on it. And as soon as we mentioned to them, you really ought to think about heating these walls. They love that idea. And I have radiant walls in my home, and both in the upstairs and in our lower level area. And it's a night, particularly in renovation. We should actually talk about that because there's a real large renovation market going on. And one thing about renovating basements is people, given the choice, they'd rather not sacrifice ceiling height, maybe to put in a radiant floor.
You know what, Robert? Hold that thought. We have to go to news break, but let's hang on. We'll chat about that when we come back here at home.
Welcome back to At Home. Here are your hosts, Cheryl Gillespie and Sam Shakura.
Well, we're going to jump right back in here at home and continue our conversation about heating and cooling your home and what's new and trendy on the market. And Robert, when we were off the air and on the break, it was kind of funny because you said what was trendy was actually back to keeping it simple.
Yeah, it's really important. There's no end of technology available for HVAC systems, and as much as I like the technology, I think at the end of the day, most consumers don't want to have a relationship with their heating system. And even though the technology allows them to dial in and talk to their different devices, I think most people at the end of the day, they'd rather spend time with their family. I think they would, if they like to golf or they like to fish, those are the things that they want to have relationships with. So I think simple is really important. And so, in the last sort of 8 to 9 years, we've been working with our clients and saying, we can do this simple. And by doing it simple, you don't have to worry about all of the whiz-bang things that can go wrong with some of the HVAC systems. So we're certainly working with manufacturers to get them back to where they used to be in terms of making things simple. If they do have to use technology, and I'm not anti-technology because there's some real benefits to it, but if you do have to use it, make sure that it's behind a real simple user interface so that it's easy for the consumer to use. And the other thing that we want consumers to understand is that at some point when they go to sell that house, and it's a big asset for people to have as a home, but at some point they're going to have to sell that asset, and it makes it easier to sell the home when there's something that's simple in the house that other people can understand. If it's so complicated and so expensive and there's so much whiz-bang in there, there's a certain population that would get it, but that's a very small part of the population. You want to sell that house, to as many people as are willing to buy it, and that makes your decision to put in an HVAC system that people recognize and that find it simple, and that will serve you well when you go to sell that house.
A lot of folks are getting energy audits done, and I find them really quite interesting because they can actually tell you how much energy you're paying for every month for that refrigerator or leaving that computer on.
Yeah, it's another great sort of trend that we're seeing, and I say trend as opposed to a fad because it is something that I think we'll see in our lifetime, that we will always see energy audits, and it's a great process. I mean, you have, when you buy a vehicle, for example, you have an idea of what that vehicle is going to use for fuel and maintenance and these types of things, and having that on your home, which is a much bigger investment than your vehicle, is a really valuable tool. So we certainly recommend on new and old houses, whether you're buying an existing house, a previously owned home, that you should have an audit done on it so that you know what you're buying in terms of the indoor environment and then also the energy. And we want to make sure that we talk about, differentiate between having an energy audit and an indoor environmental quality audit, because there are two things, but they can be done by the same person. And then also in terms of new construction, and again, this goes back to, when we talked about defining your expectations with the builders and the contractors, and because there's standards in terms of leakage and energy use, you can hold the builders and the contractors to these standards, and that you can verify through these auditing processes. We should also, if we talk, maybe quickly mention that there's a difference between when we say standards and codes, and consumers need to know that codes are the minimum requirement; they're not the maximum requirement. And if codes were judged by educational standards, codes would represent sort of a D grade, the lowest that you can go before you fail, and people should understand that. But within the codes, there's reference to standards, and standards tend to be a higher level. So when we talk about energy audits, these people are testing to a standard, and it's very, very important to make sure that we differentiate between the standard and the codes. And when they do test, they test to the standards.
Well, we're seeing a lot more LEED certified construction as well.
Yeah, LEED's interesting. People either hate LEED or they love LEED. And one thing that LEED has done is it's brought a huge awareness to indoor environmental quality, for one, but also the energy, and then also more holistic things in terms of where you're building that and how close it is to public transportation. And I mean, there's a ton of different metrics within the program, but LEED has if nothing else, it's brought awareness at the consumer level about these very important parts of building really good buildings.
Robert, I know you've inspired our listeners to think about their air quality and their HVAC systems at home. If we need more information, and undoubtedly we will, where should we go?
Well, we have a not-for-profit website called healthyheating.com. And that website, we launched it back in 2004. And we basically collected information from all over the world, from specialists, and it's there for people to use and have at it. And it's, anything you want to know about energy and indoor environmental quality, it's there at the website.
All right. Thank you so very much for joining us and helping to inspire more questions, I think.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure to chat with you. Don't you guys go anywhere. Sam and I will be right back here at home.